All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. It's time for us to get started on our second second lesson uh, of the reunion. But we're actually, of course, on lesson 3, which is Invitation, the Power of Nonviolence in the Hands of Prophetic People. And there's a video that I'm going to play that's 24 minutes. So make sure you're settled in. But some of you may have seen this. Every time I see it, I've probably seen it at least 5 or 6 times now. I feel like I learned something new or I gain new appreciation from it. So even if you've seen it before, it's well worth the time. And it also goes very well with our lesson today. In fact, I almost feel like the lesson writers maybe borrowed some of the ideas that are contained here. Or anyway, it's very, very excellent for this lesson. It's a film by Magnus and Elray Henriksen, who are from Norway, and you'll see them very briefly at the beginning of the film. And they are both members of the church in Norway, where I believe they are Latter-day Seekers, and just did a wonderful job of making this film. If you watch it real closely, you'll see some scenes inside the temple where they pan the crowd at the 25th anniversary of the Prayer for Peace, and you can see me sitting in the balcony wearing my blue plaid shirt. So keep your eyes open for that. It's a real highlight. Just kidding. All right, so we're going to go ahead and begin this, and then we'll come back when the video is complete. Let me make sure I'm muted.
This is me, Elray, and this is my filmmaker brother, Magnus. And here we are in Independence, Missouri. We've just flown in from Norway to visit a place that is significant enough to draw people from all over the world. You can see the temple behind us. It was dedicated 25 years ago to the pursuit of peace, reconciliation, and healing of the spirit.
Visitors to 1840s Nauvoo would at times describe cannons in the Prophet Joseph Smith's yard, shocking from today's perspective, but I think we need to put it in the context of the 1838 Mormon War in northern Missouri. We were deeply traumatized by those experiences. I believe, and some have argued, like Matthew Bolton, that we as a people suffered collective trauma from that violent experience. And so in Nauvoo, we are making decisions through the lens of that trauma. So instead of judging the things we did in Nauvoo, I empathize with the people. I hurt for them. We were able, though, to turn again to the path to peace with Joseph III's leadership, and he maintained that path through his death in 1914. But shortly after he died, just 6 months later, the beginnings of what would become World War I are occurring in Europe, and soon we're in World War II, and we as a people, again, were overcome by the culture of violence surrounding us, and we embrace violence as a means to solve our differences, though again have returned to what I think is closer to the 1830s position of we were not quite pacifists at that time, but deeply committed to peacemaking. And I feel like today, Community of Christ World Conference, we are in a place where Joseph III positioned us in 1865. Peace is eminently our mission.
So here we are, El Rey, southeast corner of the temple. Joseph Smith Jr., Sidney Rigdon and others came here in 1831 and dedicated this spot. This is the highest spot for miles around. It's over 1,000 feet. The idea of going up to the temple from Isaiah chapter 2, that's echoing here. And then the Church of Christ temple lot just over here, they've been stewards of this plot for over 100 years. They represent the earliest phase of church organization. I think of them representing 1830, 1833. The saints come here and are driven out in 1833. The Heartland era continues, and Community of Christ with the temple and the auditorium, they identify with the Heartland era up to 1837. And then the LDS Church Visitors Center just over here represents 1839 to 1844. So temple was never built here, but the longing of our people in the whole movement wanted this temple to be built. And so that's why the RLDS temple, or the Community of Christ temple, is here.
So we talk a lot about the Heartland temple because the purposes of the Heartland temple is where we went to in understanding temple. So a place for community gathering, a place for worship and education, a place to come together and experience community together and experience the presence of the Holy Spirit. In a sense, it's like an endowing of spirit, similar to Pentecost, and which is similar to the dedication of the Heartland temple. And then ascending out into the world to partner with God to accomplish God's dream for the world of peace, Zion.
This whole building is dedicated to the pursuit of peace. That's the purpose, and it has a transforming effect on our people, because we're a people now dedicated to the pursuit of peace. The other temple is the whole people of God.
Thinking about the 25th anniversary of the temple dedication and what kind of meaning we would need to emphasize and hold up for people. And then secondly, just my own ongoing quest to understand where the church is at in its development and what vision will continue to faithfully guide the church as well as motivate people to respond. And one of the challenges is connecting the story of what has occurred, the sacred story, the history, with meaning for the future. So we're not just stuck in time. As a church, we understand ourselves as not being static or stayed, but that we are a movement. And movement means we're always trying to discern more about the will and purposes of God.
So that profound moment, nearly 200 years ago, 199 years ago, when Joseph was a young 14-year-old boy, troubled about questions, went into the woods to pray on a beautiful spring day in May 1820, and had a vision. So we start the worshipper's path, our entry into the temple, with this beautiful glass work reminiscent of that grove experience. So we begin our worship acknowledging that seminal experience of a 14-year-old boy that starts our whole movement.
The temple is a resource for us to stimulate our reflection and to keep raising possibilities in terms of our understanding of the gospel in the world.
I love the Exodus story. where Moses encounters the burning bush. The burning bush is aflame but not consumed. Moses hears the Holy Spirit speak through the burning bush and tell him to take off his shoes. He's standing on holy ground. So it's a moment of huge worship. And Moses also hears the Spirit saying, I am the God of your father, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And I'm showing up in your generation too. It's a profound moment for Moses. And then he hears the Holy Spirit say, the Lord say, I've heard the cries of my people. I've seen their suffering, and I've come down to deliver them. And Moses, I need you to go and talk to Pharaoh. And Moses says, I can't, I stutter. I'm not a politician. But Pharaoh will laugh at me. He always did when I grew up in Pharaoh's household. So he feels totally inadequate, but that's the whole point. It's by God's power. This is a profound story in the Bible. I'm so grateful that we have it. If I was Pharaoh, if I was a rich person, I would make sure this story was repressed, suppressed, but it's not. It's out in the open. So God is on the side of the poor slaves. You can't be poorer than a slave. You don't even own your own body. So this is a really wonderful way of beginning our journey up the worshipper's path. Peace must be correlated with justice for the poorest human being. I never feel particularly holy enough to come into the temple, but this story reminds me that God is a loving Father being who is ready to run and embrace me. We can step into this ourselves and be embraced by a loving God who has run towards us to welcome us here.
So as I was reflecting on all of that, I had an interesting experience, which was the Spirit drawing me back into inspired counsel that had been given to the church in the past, either by my predecessors or some that I've been called upon to share. And seeing certain parts of it illuminated or magnified or emphasized in print, it would be bold print, as enduring meaning that we needed to continue to bring careful attention to. And there were certain phrases that stood out about peace and reconciliation, spiritual renewal in the church, that went beyond just a physical structure in which significant worship and fellowship and learning occurs, referring to the temple as a symbol for a continued journey into understanding the essence of Jesus Christ and Christ's ministry, and the particular themes of that ministry.
What does the cross mean for us? Of course, we'll never exhaust the meaning of atonement and the rich symbolism in this cross. I'm really glad this is not a pretty cross, because the cross is ugly. It's the electric chair, it's the hangman's noose, it's the firing squad. Executions still happen today, and we need to remember that Jesus was executed. The cross reminds me that Christians have to be against the death penalty, because God in Jesus suffered the death penalty. Jesus is crucified because he turns over the tables in the temple. So Jesus was standing up for justice against the corrupt temple system. So that's also a meaning of the cross here. We should also have courage to stand up for justice. So this is the tree of life in the book of Revelation, and the leaves, it says, are for the healing of the nations. So I love this symbol here. The tree of life is present in Judaism, is present in Islam, it's present in Christianity, it's present in the Book of Mormon too. So it's in our tradition as well. So the artist is Muslim. So I think it's very cool on this worshipper's path. We have something from a Muslim artist.
In a way, it may seem very different than the founding roots of our movement, and at the same time, it really rings true to me that part of what Joseph Smith felt was this sense to really try to take hold of who Jesus was and what Jesus was revealing to us about the nature of God in his life and ministry.
So there's a group of women trained in this Japanese way of arranging flowers that does this every week. It's always beautiful. And there's 3 levels: there's heaven, there's sky, there's earth. And it's very simple as well. This reminds me that God and humans together can do something very beautiful. So sometimes people come to the temple in their darkest times, desperate for help. Maybe a personal struggle, maybe some issue in their family, maybe loss of jobs, maybe guilt, some kind of personal struggle. So these 3 statues helping people know that God loves them and can help them at the darkest time of struggle. So there's a reassurance that God can meet everyone, no matter where they are on their journey. This is assuring people that it's not superficial grace. It's taking into account our real concrete human struggles that we at some time in our lives all wrestle with, perhaps.
I think being a people of the temple is people who live out God's shalom in the world. I like the term shalom better than peace. Shalom is a much richer term. And that means be able to be involved in people's lives so that they can flourish and be what God intended them to be. It means being able to reconcile with others, reconcile with ourselves and the issues we face, reconcile with our families and our workmates, reconcile with creation, and reconcile and restore relationships with God. And then being a people of the temple means to be able to heal and be able to exercise sorrow and to lament and to engage in all the hurts of people and be able to bring healing.
So we try to fill the hole in our souls with lots of material things. That's why there's an environmental crisis. That's why capitalism and its hoarding of wealth creates so much misery in our world. So Jesus is promising that he can fill the hole in our soul. The hole in our soul is an infinite need of longing for the divine, but we don't know it. We go out of worship and see our task is to thrust in our sickle, as it were. The fields are ripe to harvest. People are ready for our peace message, our message of peace and justice, of creating that in the world, because so many people are struggling with oppression and sadness and war and poverty. we have a task to do as we leave worship. And this window reminds us of that.
I think there are a lot of images of who Jesus is. Some are very personal as one Savior, and that's appropriate. Some are nationalistic. Some are even militaristic. So humans have created images of Jesus to fit the human agenda or human needs. The temple gives us an image of Jesus that says redemption comes through sacrificial love, living that out in reconciliation between persons and groups and nations, and striving for wholeness in life. And so the redemption occurs through what Jesus demonstrated in his own life in terms of compassion, reconciliation, forgiveness, building inclusive community. That's how the world is redeemed.
Here we have the church seal on these doors. They're bronze doors. Each one of these 3 doors weighs 16 tons. Yet a child can open these doors. The idea is in worship is that we come out of these doors after worship, inspired by worship to make peace in the world. This church seal with lion, lamb, and a little child leading them is really important visual theology for our tradition. Without this visual theology, we wouldn't have a peace mission. Without this visual theology of the church seal, we wouldn't have this soaring temple spire up to 300 feet dedicated to the pursuit of peace, reconciliation, and healing of the spirit. We wouldn't have that dedication, that purpose, except for this church seal. Here we are. I want you to see these 50 trees here. And the trees are ginkgo biloba. And they're found by Buddhist temples all over East Asia. It's a peace tree. Hiroshima, 1945, ground zero. 6 ginkgo trees survived the atom blast without mutation. So it's also a tree of resurrection, a tree of hope.
The Independence Temple is an important symbol to us of our journey of a restoration people and our deepening understanding of what restoration is and how God calls us to be part of that restoring influence in the world today.
This is not something that is a human agenda, but this is actually insight into the revelation of God in Jesus Christ, and it's calling our attention to it.
And I think the Community of Christ story is different to the Quakers and the Mennonites. We participated in violence in northern Missouri. We had an army of 5,000 people, 5,000 men in Nauvoo. So we have this militant legacy. Now Joseph III starts to distance us from that. But it's very powerful. I think it's a very powerful story that we're a violent church that is repenting and has now ended up in a peace position, or ending up towards a peace position, a non-violent position. This gives hope in the world for lots of religions that have also had violent histories. We're not a pure peace church, but praise God, we're a repenting peace church.
In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many people shall say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. From Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 to 4.
So I hope that you enjoyed that. It took me back to being a part of that conference and that experience. And I hope you noticed a couple of things. It did a good job of taking us through our history as a movement in the Community of Christ in the early Restoration. It also did a great job of showing us the temple and the artwork of the temple, but as a way of entering into our theology, and how it emerged out onto that plaza and to this beating the swords into plowshares. And it was aspirational in terms of our desire to be a peaceful people, as Andrew Bolton suggested, a repenting peace church and the hope for peace and nonviolence. And so very, very useful introduction for today's lesson here on chapter 3. So the framing of this lesson, as you saw in the materials, begins with a couple of scriptures from Romans 12:21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And from Luke chapter 6. Love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great. You will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So we're a prophetic people, but how? The text suggests to us that the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament proclaimed a coming day when justice will roll down like waters, when swords will be beaten into plowshares. In Amos, and nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And the prophets looked forward to a Messiah, the Prince of Peace, to bring this day. Let's talk for a moment about a much more modern context, that of Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Injustice anywhere is the threat to justice everywhere." He wrote this in his letter from a Birmingham jail in which he had practiced civil disobedience and was found himself in jail. And responding to an inquiry, this letter is regarded as a very important philosophical work. King called white churches as well to stand up and provide support to the civil rights movement. And as a minister of the gospel, he advocated for and used nonviolence as a message which is reactualized today. I'd like to remind everyone that we have an opportunity to do a deep dive into this philosophy and understanding. Vince Lewis will be sharing with us next Saturday from 9 to 12 in the morning, and then again in the afternoon from 1 to 4 on Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Nonviolence and the Beloved Community. So it's exactly on the topic of what we're studying here in our reunion, but a really in-depth opportunity. If you haven't received the emails in which you've had the opportunity to register, go ahead and look back at those. If you've got them and haven't registered yet, if you don't get our emails, then simply send me a message and I'll be happy to make sure you get the link so that you can register and participate in that event next Saturday. So the text goes on and asks us, in a way, who is our Moses and who is our Aaron today? President Steve Veazey, in his closing sermon at the 2016 World Conference, posed a question. It's saying God is calling for a massive exodus of people from poverty and related suffering. Who will be the prophets standing before crafty politicians and predatory hoarders of wealth, saying with conviction, "You had better let God's people go"? Can you see Community of Christ as that voice in the world? President Veazey asked. So I'm going to invite us now to share together, in what ways has Community of Christ been that voice for justice in the world? In what ways has Community of Christ been that voice for justice in your community? And if it hasn't, then you certainly can share about that as well. But we want to go ahead and go into breakout rooms. We've got probably a need for about 5 rooms here. Actually, I'm going to make it 4 rooms, and we'll give you about 6 or 7 minutes altogether to respond to this question. In what ways has Community of Christ been that voice for justice in the world in your community? So go ahead and click yes when I open all rooms to join in and share with one another. Okay, everyone will be back in about 30 seconds. Okay, we're back. Who's going to report for group one? How did we answer that question? Is it you, Marilyn?
Sure, I can respond. Our group talked about the prayer for peace that's held daily at the temple in Independence and how that lifts up peace every single day uh, and becomes a way that we can proclaim peace. And that's brought down to the congregational level in that we include prayer for peace every week in our Sunday services. We also mentioned it gives us the opportunity to expand our knowledge about different countries in the world as we learn about them and what their needs might be. And then locally, we talked about participating in things like our local clergy association, because there's opportunities that abound there for participation in programs like food pantries, Habitat for Humanity, homelessness, etc. And the pastors have many opportunities there to engage their congregation in activities that lift up the needs of the poor.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marilyn. And on that note, for those of you that want to learn more about the Prayer for Peace Country of the Day, if you tune in at 12:30 Central Time with David and Paul DeBarth, they take us into a little half-hour lesson about the country that we're praying for on Monday through Fridays. And then at right around 1 o'clock, we begin the recitation of the Prayer for Peace. So it's a great opportunity on Monday through Fridays to learn about a lot of different countries in the world. And I know Lori Long and I participates in that. And I get there once in a while, and Becky and some others. And it's a really good opportunity to find enrichment and really pay serious attention to learning more about what's going on in our world. So thank you for that, Marilyn, in group one. Louita, you were in group two. Were you paying attention? You want to report back to us? I didn't mean it to sound that way.
You must be picking the talkers. Okay, we had a lot of things come up. Lamoni has an extraordinarily fine food bank. And we mentioned something Lori Long established, and that was the time banking system. I won't explain that. We have our congregation has a Christmas store in which people either contribute money or gifts, and then children can come in and free pick out presents to give to somebody at Christmas time. We have the spread, which was a free meal, which the young adults cooked with Hy-Vee providing the food. We always appreciated that. And it was a wonderful sort of win-win. Had a good meal. We didn't have to cook that night, or if a person was really hungry, they had a meal. But we enjoyed this socialization with all the different people in the community. Was there something else I missed? Don? Dick?
Ron mentioned something.
I mentioned the JAPA, that Northwest Congregations working with JAPA.
Nice. Those are all great examples. So thank you for that. Now, the third group Sterling, were you paying attention enough that you can give us a report back from Group 3?
Yes. There was a discussion about whether or not it's the church that's leading or it's individuals within the church that are leading. And the opinion was expressed that it would be nice if we had more individuals who were leading in that regard. It appears to be a somewhat imbalanced load on the shoulders of some of the folks here in town. I think there is an opinion among some within the community that the church, that is the institution, has an overly large representation in the Lions Club, the Optimist Club, the City Council, the Chamber of Commerce. Considering the fact that we are quite numerous, that's not surprising.
Right.
It's unfortunate that some who are not of this denomination seem to feel overwhelmed with the numeric presence of other Church of Christ members.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sterling. I appreciate that perspective. That's kind of some insight into some of the challenges in the efforts that we're taking. On the fourth group, Terry Jones, I see you there. You want to tell us what your group was talking about?
Well, as already mentioned, we discussed the Lamoni food pantry and the underlying, Laura, you said it was an underlying needs fund of some type that was going on there. And then Lynn from Texas was talking about what her group is doing down there. And Mel had some good points too regarding should we be doing more than just food pantries? So should we be out demonstrating? He's talking about his daughter-in-law in New Jersey and some of the things that she's been involved in and how we can express ourselves in many various ways, not just in social organizations.
Right, so being a voice against the causes of systemic injustice. Good questions, and we see some of that, but probably not as visibly in the activities of our members, that's for sure. Okay, thank you. I think that was very good sharing, and I'm gonna resume the slides now so that we can continue with the lesson. One of the things that I wanted to share with you was just as we're talking about some of the needs in our community. This is a map of the Lamoni Heartland Mission Center showing the poverty rate in each of the counties where we have congregations. And the county that has the highest level of poverty in the entire state of Iowa is at 20.3%, is Decatur County, home to the Bloomington congregation and the Lamoni congregation. Just below that, you see Harrison County, where the Andover congregation is at 15.5. Ringgold County, where Mount Ayr congregation is 14.3. Union County, where Creston is, 13.4% poverty rate. Clark County, where Osceola is, 11.2% poverty rate. Lucas County, where Sheraton is, 15.1% poverty rate. Warren County has the lowest rate of poverty of any counties, where Indianola congregation is 7.1. Marion County, where Knoxville congregation is 9.2% poverty rate. And Mahaska, where Oskaloosa is, 12.4%. Polk County, where we have, of course, West Des Moines, Northwest, and Central Des Moines congregations at 9.9% poverty rate. Jasper County has 10.2% poverty rate, which is where the Marion congregation is. And then going above that is Marshalltown, Marshalltown congregation, Marshall County, 11.3% poverty rate. Story County, where Ames congregation is, quite high as well, 18.9%. I mean, these are all high. Anything around 10% or higher is high. Greene County, where Jefferson congregation is 12.1% poverty rate, and then all the way up in Sarasota County, where Clear Lake is located near Mason City, 10.4% poverty rate. So the Lamoni Heartland poverty rates are quite high. Decatur
Glenn,
County, yeah.
you missed Webster County. We're at 15.3 poverty rate.
Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. I did. You know, I put this together and just kind of skipped over that somehow. Sorry about that. 15.3. Thanks for looking that up. Did you just look that up while we were talking?
No, I noticed it the other day when I was looking at the COVID sites. So it was there.
Well, kudos to you for having that on the top of your head. That's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, so these are really, really high rates of poverty, and you know, compare it to, you know, Decatur County has a higher rate of poverty than Los Angeles, than Chicago, and then New York City. So this is serious issues that we need to look at. And some might say, well, it's not all in Lamoni. I would understand that, or it's not all in maybe the town where your congregation is located, but it's in your area for sure. And so asking ourselves questions of how to respond to that, I think is important.
Glenn,
yeah.
I think the significance of observing poverty rates is not the numbers we see here, but the fact that these numbers are changing. We're on a curve, and right now poverty is increasing in all the areas that you have mentioned. With the anticipated effects of climate change, of economic disruption, and of cultural and governance instability within the country, I think we can anticipate that these things are going to increase considerably. If there has ever been a call for the community of Christ to join with its neighbors in strengthening the capacity of the community to function as a single body, it's in front of us now.
Absolutely. Thank you for underscoring that, Sterling. And you're right. The trend is not good. And certainly that trend was there before COVID. COVID has deepened it in many respects as well. So something to watch and to make commitment about. And it's not simply a matter of charity, although charity is certainly important. But as was pointed out in the previous discussion, the question of, you know, are we speaking out? Are we looking at the systemic causes of poverty? I mean, I remember I was at Graceland in the 1970s, and we were talking about rural poverty in Decatur County back then. So this is not a new issue either. And so that would be an indication that there are systemic causes for this that are long-term and that need to be addressed in a serious way. So it's something for each of our congregations and the Mission Center to continue to ask, how are we responding? So the question kind of is a little overwhelming. Maybe we feel a bit like Moses. I loved the discussion that Andrew Bolton had as they were standing in the fog outside the temple. You know, maybe we feel like Moses, you know, we stutter. How are we able to respond? In a moment of introspection, we might reply, who are we that we should go and do this? Like Moses, our movement has a story of violence of its own. And like Moses, we would rather not go. As described in the previous article, the early history of Community of Christ was troubled. We embraced violence to fight war in northern Missouri in 1838, set up an army of 5,000 men in Nauvoo, Illinois. But we also imagined Zion in our midst, where God's justice and peace reigned. I also talked in the film about visual theology, and this was in your text as well. The passage from Isaiah 11, 1 through 9, inspired our church seal. when the Messiah comes, the wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. They will not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So this seal, church seal, or logo, if you want to refer to it as that, has been with us our entire lives. There isn't one of us here who hasn't, lived in a time when this seal or a version of it wasn't a central part of our identity. On the pulpits in the congregations where we gather, in the letterhead that we send out, in church documents and publications and books, reinforced over and over again in the single word peace. We together suggest that Jesus is the Messiah who came to teach peace in his words, in his life, and his ministry. And the church seal, as an inspirer of the temple's purpose, is, as Andrew suggested, visual theology, and calls us toward nonviolence. So the question, and we'll give you time in your groups again, what does the church seal mean to you? How would you describe the meaning of the church seal to a seeker or a friend? So think about that. Does it have meaning to you? And if someone were to ask you about it, how would you describe it to that person? So we're going to go ahead and go in our groups, and we'll spend about another 6 or 7 minutes on this question. So go ahead and join the group when you can there. Okay, welcome back. I think you're all back. Yeah. We're not going to discuss this one in the larger group, but I want to maybe recommend that you think about your response to this question. What does the church seal mean to me? Maybe write an essay, 300 words or less, send it in to Daily Bread or send it to Steve Bowley. It could be used as one of our peace moments. Consider that as maybe a further way of responding. So we're going to move on. I want to share with you some images taken from the Des Moines Register. This is related to the Black Lives Matters protest on June 2nd of 2020. There's 4 images here. I'm not going to describe them other than that the number 4, which might be a little hard to see, that's the Iowa Capitol building in the background there. And across the bottom, those are Iowa State Troopers in riot gear. It's so small that you might not be able to see that if I don't describe it. The rest of them should be kind of self-explanatory. So take a look here and think about which one of these images is really speaking to you. Which one of these images do you think Community of Christ may have a role in, may have a calling to respond to? Of course, the easy answer is all of them, but I want you to pick one that particularly speaks to you. And we're going to share, but this time just in dyads, in groups of 2. So we'll just ask you to spend about 2 minutes explaining your reaction to one of these photos. So pick one, photo 1, 2, 3, or 4. Some of you are on the phone, aren't able to see it. That's okay. We'll let your partner share first, and then you can kind of share a general response to that. But let's go into breakout rooms now. Which one of these pictures calls to you? Where do you see a role for Community of Christ? Which one speaks to you? And I'm going to recreate the rooms. You might have 3 people in some of your groups. Here we go.
Well, Glenn,
Yes.
this is Darrell Frickson from Creston.
Hi, Darrell.
I'm not in one of your breakout groups, but I want to comment on your, even though I didn't see this police action, I wanted to comment about it.
Okay.
We contribute to the Crumb Donors Ministry out in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they have a huge issue with crime, with drugs, and we have a church that's set up right in the middle of that area, and the people there go to that church as a safe place, away from the law enforcement, and they're doing just have testimonies in a Herald every month about the good that they're doing to try to, I guess, convert or to recruit or try to bring health and hold respect to some of the people that have been caught up in drugs. And I feel they're doing a tremendous good in terms of trying to help out with
Thank you, Darrell. Thank you for sharing that, Darrell. So that's, you're talking about Jimmy Munson and the ministry there in Chattanooga, is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Very good.
They're one of the few churches that are growing. They established they have a lot of home churches, but they do a lot of ministry through home churches. But in fact, their group is growing at a pretty good rate.
Great. I appreciate that. Well, everybody's back now. And we're, so I appreciate your sharing that with us. We're going to continue here talking about principled nonviolence. And so in the books, it suggested that to learn more about the power of resisting nonviolently, we turn to Jesus' experience living under the brutal colonial rule of the Roman Empire. After his baptism, Jesus faced the temptation of creating God's kingdom on earth by violence. At the time of John's arrest, he proclaimed the kingdom of God was near and read his mission statement that began with good news for the poor. His first recruits were not soldiers, but unarmed fishermen, Peter and Andrew, James and John. Their first lesson on discipleship was the Sermon on the Plain in Luke and the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. In Luke and Matthew, Jesus taught disciples not to retaliate, to turn the other cheek, to walk the second mile, and to love our enemies, for God's grace is given to good and bad alike. In this idea of principled nonviolence, other New Testament authors also taught this, including Paul. And we remember the stories that Jesus rebuked James and John for wanting to command fire to come down on an inhospitable Samaritan village, and then taught the Good Samaritan parable on loving your enemies to further clarify his message. Jesus is consistent in his practice of principled nonviolence right to the end. At his arrest, he rebukes the disciple who attacked the servant of the high priest with a sword. Dying on the cross, Jesus forgave those who trespassed against him, so we could learn to do the same. With renewed reassurance of God's peace and non-retribution, after the resurrection of the disciples were reborn as followers of the way. Through these examples, Jesus Christ reveals a God who shows mercy to good and bad alike. So what is principled nonviolence? How does the life and teaching of Jesus illustrate principled nonviolence? Let's discuss some historical and current examples of principled nonviolence. Why don't we do this in the group as a whole and just get a few of you that might have an idea. Current examples of historical or current or historical examples of principled nonviolence. What might those be? Any ideas?
Well, I'm not sure what we mean by principled nonviolence.
Is a matter of being nonviolent is a matter of principle, not be, by choice. In other words, you choose specifically to react in a nonviolent way. Some people are nonviolent because they're oppressed.
A principle for us might actually go to the Book of Mormon, where there's the Lord has said, as long as righteous people inhabit this land, they will be preserved against their enemies. And basically what it says is that we are as free as the most persecuted among us. And so a current example of that would be how we treat the Hispanic children in this country. Both political parties have ignored the fact that we put children into dangerous situations with the virus in cages and separating them from their parents. And we are committing a horrible crime there that is endangering the hand of God's protection on this nation, and on us as a people. And we can look the other way and ignore this, or we can do something about it. There are some organizations called, one is RAICES, RAICES, that stands up for the rights of these immigrant children that I have association with. But both political parties have largely ignored this. The cage has started with the Obama administration, and we still largely haven't addressed this problem. It's one thing to have a conservative immigration policy. It's quite another to mistreat people. And a principled approach is to realize that promise in the Book of Mormon, that we're only as free as the least among us, and to stand up for those that don't have rights, for being mistreated. That's a principle. That's a principled approach to this problem.
What are some other examples of principled nonviolence that you can think of?
Somebody else might have to correct some of the details, but I believe during the First World War, F. Henry Edwards declared himself conscientious objector. And I'm not sure if he had to go to prison or just work in some other situation, or what the outcome was of that.
My recollection is he went to jail, yeah, in the United Kingdom.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I think of Martin Luther King Jr. and so many of the things that he wrote and spoke were to me filled with an extreme amount of wisdom and inspiration, I believe, from God, and that apply to our lives yet today, 50 years later. And I think we can look at some of the things that he has said as we approach the problems of today. And I think about the bridge at Selma, where it was not his intention to have anyone killed. It was to be a peaceful demonstration, is my understanding. And then it, of course, wasn't, and people were killed, and awful things happened there. And I think we still need to stand up as a denomination for things that are right, and to do it in a way as Martin Luther King did. Sometimes one person isn't enough, but you can get a group of people and you can stand up and you can make a difference. And we are called to make a difference in the world.
And I think about teachers in schools, for example, or in parents who teach their kids, to resolve issues not with violence, but with forgiveness, with understanding, you know, seeing the other person's point of view, that kind of thing. So those are things that I think happen.
I think the United States has always tried to make our elections nonviolent.
Sure. So just voting as a nonviolent action for change. All right. Thanks for sharing, everybody. We're going to move on so we can try to get you get us finished here within the 90-minute limit. Pragmatic nonviolence is the next topic. Jesus' use of nonviolent strategy as a pragmatic tool is best understood in context. Jesus sent out the first apostles and 70 as lambs among wolves. He told them to be wise as serpents, yet innocent as doves, as they navigated the brutalities of the Roman Empire. By entering Jerusalem riding a donkey and not a cavalry horse, Jesus claimed royal succession with King David in a tense situation where Jewish leaders were in collusion with the Roman occupying power. For those who followed Jesus and acclaimed him as the messianic leader and as the Son of God, they were in fact rejecting the power of the emperor, who also claimed to be the Son of God. Through Jesus' cleansing of the temple in protest against the outrageous prices being charged the poor for sacrificial animals, he reclaimed ownership of the temple as a place of prayer for all nations and condemned its misuse as that of a den of robbers. After this nonviolent campaign, Jewish leaders plotted to kill him, but could not do anything straight away because the crowd protected Jesus. The actions of Jesus in this story teach nonviolence as a pragmatic tool. The quote here from Gene Sharp is, "It is our contention that political defiance or nonviolent struggle is the most powerful means available to those struggling for freedom." He wrote that in 1973 in his groundbreaking study, From Dictatorship to Democracy. This creative, practical nonviolence has been called a war by other means. Nonviolent activists wage their own battles. They plan wise strategy and tactics. Pragmatic nonviolence demands courage, discipline, and sacrifice of its nonviolent soldiers. It is a method that can work for those who do not have military power or the financial means to fight violently. So you remember we mentioned the book Why Civil Resistance Works. Nonviolence is pragmatically more successful and more effective in creating durable peace. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stevens' examination of 323 violent and nonviolent campaigns or mass actions from 1900 to 2006 found that nonviolent resistance was twice as effective as violent resistance, and nonviolent campaigns were also more likely to result in democratic and peaceful societies after a conflict. In contrast, armed rebellions have decreased in their effectiveness, and when they have been victorious, have almost never produced democracies, often relapsing into civil war. For further reading on these nonviolent approaches, including different historical positions of Christianity to violence, you can download the booklet, 4 Approaches to Violence from Herald House. When you go to the Herald House website, you will find this in the member created resources section. So that's a member created resource from some of the same authors of today's lesson, Andrew Bolton, L. Ray Henriksen, and David Anderson. Somebody knows David pretty well that's participating in this class, I think. So we're at the end here, but we wanted to give you some time again today to journal on your experience. What captured your attention? For what are you most grateful? So let's take a couple of minutes and just write down a few notes, things you might want to remember and go back to from our time together today. That was Pam Robeson on the auditorium organ. By the way, any of you who are worship planners that are looking for preludes, postludes, interludes, and some hymns that have been recorded on organ without vocals, Pam Robeson's account on YouTube is a great place to find. Just type in Pam Robeson, R-O-B-I-S-O-N, organ on your YouTube search, and you'll find them. Let's close today by singing our way out with O Day of Peace, written by Carl Daw.
O day of peace that dimly shines through all our hopes and prayers and dreams, guide us to justice, truth, and love, delivered from our selfish schemes. May swords of hate fall from our hands, our hearts from envy find release, till by God's grace our warring world shall see Christ's promised reign of peace. Then shall the wolf dwell with the lamb, nor shall the fierce devour the small. As beast and cattle calmly graze, a little child shall lead them all. Then enemies shall learn to love, all creatures find their true accord. The hope of peace shall be fulfilled, for all the earth shall know the Lord.
Nice.
You're muted, Glenn.
I was saying thank you for joining us today. And the good news is that we're bringing in the big names to continue our reunion with. So after our Lamoni Heartland Funniest Home Videos at 6:30 tonight, we will have at 7 o'clock, President of 70, Senior President of 70, John White, will be speaking in our service. And then, of course, tomorrow at 10 a.m., we have the last of the 5 lessons in the reunion materials being taught by President Steve Veazey, who wrote the materials for that lesson. And then in the evening at 7 p.m., President Veazey will be back with a message on our theme of create peace here. So we're really looking forward to tonight and tomorrow. Thank you all very much. I've enjoyed preparing these materials. I think when you're asked to teach something, you end up learning a lot. So that was very helpful. So have a great day, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you this evening at 6:30.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
you.